Look, all I'm saying is that he's obviously into younger women, said Desala, as she leaned against the classroom wall. It was still 10 minutes before the professors arrived. Most of the students were early in settling in, and she glanced idly over at the trio sitting mutely at the back, letting her eyes linger. Well, mostly. You seem pretty sure of that. Jacksmith stood up to stretch, then leaned back against the low partition. Care to explain, or are you just thinking with your clam? Desala rolled her eyes at the Chalksa girl, and set one of her hands on Letsy's shoulder with a smirk, as if they were keeping a secret from the others. Just think about it. Everyone's seen him around campus. He isn't coming anywhere near any of the other professors, and my mother said he turned down literally dozens of invitations to visit from scads of noblewomen. No one is that socially dense. Women were falling all over each other with offers at the tour and during their party, so he just wasn't interested in them. Both of the twins looked her way, which was a bit uncanny, but only Imelda Sasana, that girl from Wilst of all places, had the nerve to say anything. He spends a lot of time with Professor Pelavan. The Sasana girl looked rebellious, and that kind of attitude from a provincial wouldn't do. Desala sighed at Belda, as if she was explaining something to a child. Our nobility could sometimes be just as dense as lead. Of course he's seen with her. They work together, after all. Furthermore, she's probably been asked to keep an eye on him. Tell me why you're here in this class again? Because I was pretty sure they're trying to teach us how to understand humans, snarked Sephir before grinning at her. Letsy was standing just beside Desala, but didn't come to her defense. I like what he teaches. Desala felt herself start to blush in anger at Letsy not backing her up, but stuffed her reaction back down. Sephir was on the diving team with her, and the girl was good. She could be shown up and put in her place in time. Maybe. But there wasn't any sense in making her into an enemy over nothing. Letsy is right, but I'm just saying that humans are humans just like Rakiri are Rakiri. We understand them, but we're not about to go chasing down animals in the forest, are we? It's just being honest, for goddess' sake. He's a good professor, but he's still a male human professor. And it's not like everybody is wrong about what that means. Desala looked over the other girls and decided to cast her net. I bet he's looked you Kerbals over more than once. Caslin and Kamara glanced at each other. Whichever was didn't matter to Desala. Both of the twins blushed deep blue with embarrassment. There, you see, she said, and waved a hand airily. He likes women. He just must like them younger. So what? You think you're going to get anywhere with him? Jacksmith settled down in her seat for class and crossed her arms. Planning on proposing to him or something? The idea of actually proposing to a human, or that she couldn't land one if she wanted, made her blood boil, but she clamped down on her anger rather than allowing it to show. The Chalksa girl had been showing off her money more than anyone from a house of her station should, flaunting at least 2 different silk scarves. Don't be ridiculous. He isn't marrying material, I mean a human, please. Even if he were a Shivanti, he has no social standing and doesn't even have the good sense to accept invitations by some of the families that asked. Goddess, that would be stupid. He's more like, training floats? For later, when there are boys with real prospects to think about. Most of the girls looked thoughtful, but Priscilla had the nerve to smirk. So, you think you're going to grab him? Be serious. Desala wasn't going to rise to that one. Unlike that Sasana girl, the Tasane family was from a planet that mattered, and rumour was that Priscilla's mother was the planetary governess. Not an enemy to make, but she wasn't about to show weakness either. I don't see why not. Anyway, I bet none of you can. Professor, did you bring the circus videos? Jaxby raised her hand and looked over at Mevere sheepishly. It was the last 5 minutes of class, and technically still time for study questions, but the group discussion had gone well, filling in more gaps about the early industrial age to the Meiji Restoration. It wasn't the most exciting material, but the girls had really shown interest after Mevere chimed in with her personal stories about Japan. Tom looked over at the clock and then to Mevere, who gave him an indulgent smile. She knew this was coming, and honestly expected the questions earlier. Alright, sure. I think we've covered everything today. Yes, I brought the ones I mentioned, and a couple of the others. I sort to have weeded out the more obscure ones. Priscilla raised her hand. Tom had gotten to know the students by now, and Priscilla was a pretty girl, full-faced with dark hair worn down just over her shoulders. She was always impeccably turned out, yet seemed to avoid any affectations beyond a necklace, in what Tom presumed were her house colours. "How many circuses are there, Professor Warwick? I thought you said there was only one left." "Ah, I suppose I wasn't being clear. Cirque du Soleil, that's the Circus of the Sun, is the performing group, but they have different shows. Some of their shows are permanent, and some go around on tour. I suppose there must be well over 25 or so, but I weeded out the shows like Quidam or Love, and just brought in the 3 today." Desala raised her hand and gave Tom a smile. There was one step shy of a sexual harassment suit. "What's Love about, then?" Tom wasn't entirely rescued by Mevere's laugh. "Go on, Professor. Girls, just pretend he isn't going to tell you already and drag it out of him, because I really want to listen to this." "Thank you, Professor," he said, giving Mevere a playful glare for the sake of appearances. "Oh, my pleasure, Professor Warwick. Girls, this man loves his music, so if he looks like he's holding back, he's just being coy." Tom made another face, but Mevere just raised an eyebrow and shook her head. No, I'm not letting you out of the net now, and the class is waiting for your answer." "Ah, well, the show named Love is created around music by a group called the Beatles. And before any of you look up what that is, yes, it's an insect, but it's also a play on words for beat in my language." Tom gathered his thoughts for a moment. "We weren't going to get into popular culture for a few months, but about, call it 60 show years ago, there was a new genre of music that developed. The Beatles are the most popular musical group from that genre, and now that I think about it, they're probably the most popular musical group in our entire history." Sorting through his Omnipad, Tom pulled up the files he brought to share. "Anyway, that show, Love, is all their music, but of course it's all in my language. I have all the Beatles recordings available at the museum exhibit. You can download them and run them through a translator, but I don't know if it will be the same." The twins looked at each other for maybe a split second, before one raised her hand. "I'd like to hear it if I could, please." That was echoed by about half the girls, and Tom was almost positive he heard Mevere chuckle. Tom glanced back as one of the girls in back raised her hand. Melondi was one of the quietest in the group, with long raven hair worn in a braid. She was always quiet but paid attention, and Tom remembered she was in the choir. "Yes, Melondi?" I enjoy foreign music, and sometimes the choir tries new things. Can you tell me any other groups to look up?" "Better take out your Omnipads. You've done it now," said Mevere archly. "Well, there's the most popular, and then there are some of my favourites. You can't go wrong with Queen, Pink Floyd, or The Who. If you're listening for choir, I expect you like Queen. Mercury had an amazing vocal range." Mevere glanced down as her Omnipad buzzed, and she looked at the message while Tom carried on. Garnier never interrupted classes with a message, but coming right at the end of the class hour. Mevere opened the message and scrolled through it a second time, before fixing a bland look on her face. "Deshin, could you stay after class, please? Miss Pelly asked to see you." Captain Sitar nodded over to Captain Beona, while the best part of 3 pods were frantically sifting through the intel datanet. The human cultural class had started drawing in everyone in the bunker who wasn't pulling night shift, and just now she was desperately glad to have Beona and the other sergeants scrambling. Trying to explain to Agent Duvari was not going well. "Yes, ma'am, it's almost certain to be an intel leak. The humans started talking about a queen on Mercury. It's one of the planets in their solar system. Then an insurgent agency called the Velvet Underground. And we're fairly certain they're tied to someone he called the King. Yes, there were other individuals mentioned. Someone called the Four, a human named Pink Floyd, and... No, I don't know which one is Pink." Selar waved over to Jakar to get her attention, then pointed at the bottle of painkillers. She could feel the headache coming on like the smell of ozone before a storm. "Ma'am, they all look pink." "Yes, ma'am. There was also some discussion of intangible groups that may be related. He started talking about them as the Who and Yes. No, yes. No, he said yes, not who. Yes. No, there's another group called Guess Who." Selar closed her eyes and rubbed her temple as she listened to the agent. The woman wasn't losing her composure, but it wasn't fair. The universe made everyone look silly now and then, but it was usually easier not to sound like a complete idiot. "No, Guess Who. No, Guess Who. No, that's not what I mean. Guess Who. They're different from The Who. No, that's yes, and no, I have not been drinking. Right. I'll just send over a transcript. I think that would be for the best, ma'am. What do you want done about the... Yes, ma'am, we've tagged the reporter and this other girl as threat 3 and 4, respectfully. Ma'am, are you sure that's... Yes, ma'am, I understand this is 2 breaches in a week. I'll put a pod on extracting target 3 for tonight. Or make it quiet. Yes, ma'am. As soon as we have her. At the end of class, Jacksmee pulled Belder aside and asked if she wanted to get together and watch the Circus vids, explaining they were all in the same club, so it just made sense. While neither girl knew the other, they both silently watched as Deshin was led from the classroom by Professor Pelavon. Belder had a wide face, with a long and loose ponytail that wasn't really styled. She was a bit stocky for her age and only 6'4", though her father was sure she wasn't done growing. Her looks usually made her self-conscious, and normally would have made her uncomfortable around someone showing off their wealth like Jacksmee. Willist was an agricultural world near Shill, and her family had a long history there. For Belder, that was a source of pride, her armour against every cutting remark by any of the higher noble girls that wanted to give her grief. She knew her family were big fish in a small pond, but they worked hard, and she'd worked just as hard to get the Greys to come to the academy. No one could take that away from her. While Belder wasn't sure what to make of Jacksmee, she overcame her reticence and decided to accept as they exchanged concerned looks. "You know Deshin too?" "Well, sure. A lot of people know her." Jacksmee quirked a smile. "You've sat in class with her, right? Always has her hand up first. Gives everything she can. I don't know where she gets all the energy, but she's nice." "Yeah, she is. I hope she's all right." Belder stewed a bit, not sure what to say next. The Chelkser family did business in Wilst, but there was a distance between their family stations. Still, it was the thought that counted, and Belder smiled. "Want to invite some of the other girls? There's music in this, and one of the Cabal sisters is in the orchestra." "Hey, that's a great idea. Can you go grab them? There's one more girl I want to ask too." Jacksmee looked around as Belder walked over to the twins, and spotted who she was after. The girl was quiet, but she'd worn the sigil of the choir club once or twice. "Hi, it's Melondi, right? You're in the choir group, aren't you?" Melondi shouldered her bag, and looked at Jacksmee uncertainly before nodding. Hey, well, some of the girls were going to get together tonight to look at the circus video. Do you want to join us? Jacksmy saw the girl hesitate and turned up her smile. She'd learned a long time ago how to smile at a stranger like they were your best friend in the galaxy. And to be fair, it was a really good smile. Come on, it'll be fun. We can grab some snacks and hit up the common room over at my dorm. I'm in Belinda Hall. The vid screen off in the common room is absolutely huge, and we can close the doors, settle in, and have fun. Melondi looked around as some of the other girls left, and Jacksmy followed her gaze. No, I'm not inviting them. I want to enjoy this, not spend the night trading dumb insults, she whispered, as Desala and Letzi left together. That seemed to help, and as Belder and the twins started to wander back, Jacksmy figured she sealed the deal. I mean, it's a human thing, right? So some of it could be, well, odd. But you're in choir and Kamara is in the orchestra. The professor said it's got a lot of music, so we can all figure out what we're seeing and be ready with some great questions for the next class. All right. Do you mind if I invite Kellock? She sits just next to Belder and me. We talk a little and she's nice. Anyway, I don't think she's made any friends so far. Belder and the twins made it over, and Jacksmy smiled at the twins. Kamara, whichever one she was, sat on the student council. During their first year, Jacksmy just barely lost the election for the single first-year seat to her, but there were 2 spots on the student council for the second-year girls. Despite losing the election to Kamara, they formed a strong friendship, and it was no more than a few months before they started planning to get Jacksmy elected to the second seat. For the life of her, she still couldn't tell the sisters apart, but the twins seemed to like it that way. Great! Invite Kellock, and let's all meet up at Belinda Hall at 8. We could just try the one called Car, since the other show is 2 different shows to watch together, and... Tom had spent enough time around Shilvanti to see them pass their appearance as alien. The tusks, skin colour, and eyes were striking, and their size took some getting used to. But once you got past that, Shilvanti essentially looked just like humans. Maybe it would be different with one of the more exotic races. Tom had seen a few at the spaceport, though he'd not had a chance to speak with any. But at the end of it all, he now felt reasonably confident with reading Shilvanti faces. When you got past her not being human, Deshin Tezema stood a few inches over him at 6'6". She had short dark hair that she wore in a bob cut, a heart-shaped face, and a nice figure that seemed comfortably inside the Shilvanti spectrum of I was a teenage space Amazon. As he walked with Miver and Deshin towards the administration building, it was easy to set the cosmetic differences aside. What remained was a 19-year-old girl trying her very best to hide that she was afraid. That hurt, since Tom liked Deshin. She was one of the 5 second-year students in his class, and just as her biography promised, she was an outstanding student with a keen mind. She was always ready when it came to answering Miver, and she'd been the first of the girls to come to grips with the Socratic teaching style. She was bright, eager, and agreeable, and it was no surprise at all she was on the Academy Honor Roll. For the life of him, he couldn't imagine what trouble she might be in, and when he managed to steal a glance at her, Miver shook her head, looking just as mystified as he was. Ganya Sasano was not having the best of days, and try as she might, she couldn't see many options to change that. While every day could bring a new headache, the Academy was her home, and she loved being here. The problems were generally familiar, sometimes unusual, but today was painful. She was looking over the campus from her office window when Miver stepped inside with the Terzema girl just behind. Tom Warwick was along, but she'd asked Pelly to keep him out of the meeting. Miver would fill him in later, but there was too much to unpackage right now. It was encouraging that Warwick was concerned enough to come along, but Ganya just didn't want any added uncertainty while she dealt with this. Miver and Deshin, please come sit down. Ganya watched the girl look to Miver for assurance, and Miv guided the girl over gently. The look on Deshin's face was painful. Ganya knew what was in the report, and given the apprehension on her face, it appeared likely that Deshin did too. That didn't make this any easier. Deshin, I know we haven't met before, but I knew your name. Your scores are in the top 5%, not just in your class, but in the academy. That's a considerable achievement. When your parents didn't come to preterm again, I decided to send a message, congratulating them on your performance and expressing how much we looked forward to having you this year. Ganya couldn't help wanting to sigh. Every single word was true, and the girl seemed ready to cling to every word of praise like a lifeline. Ganya wondered if this was what an executioner saw, in the face of every victim. When the message address bounced back, I had my assistant do some digging. The vid room in Belinda Hall had 3 long couches and a couple of chairs off to the side. On days when something good was on, the room could comfortably sit 15 girls, with space for another 6 or 7 if they wanted to sit on the floor. There was a beach party set for tonight, so while the occasional girl wandered by from her room on the way out, they had the room to themselves. As they lowered the lights, the girls settled in. The twins perched on the couch together behind Kellock, who grabbed a cushion and stretched out on the floor, while Belder and Melondi picked through the snacks. Jacksmee scrolled through her Omnipad to find the right file, linked it to the screen, and hit play before scooting in next to Belder. I get it. It's like some kind of royal court, Jacksmee exclaimed, as the show began to unfold. The woman in the back must be an empress. You see how they're entertaining her and... Oh, and I think that must be her son. Do you see the dark-skinned one with no shirt on? Whispered one of the twins. Goddess, how could you miss him? Whispered the other. They're all dressed. See, he has a vest on, muttered Jacksmee. Melondi stared for a moment. You call that a vest? There were always girls that didn't want to go down to the beach, and over the first hour, several had wandered past and poked their heads in to see what was playing. By the time the show was halfway done, at least 5 more girls were there, and they'd had to pause at least 4 times to explain what was on. Jacksmee put a stop to it by promising copies to the new girls, as long as they let everyone watch the show through. Okay, so the other empire attacked, and the prince escaped with the dark-skinned one, whispered Melondi. I think he's a warrior or something. He's protecting the boy, Kellock broke in. Yeah, but when they fell off the ship, how did they do that? It looked just like they were swimming, but they weren't in the water. Shh! So the other empire, they're the ones wearing black, with an emperor. They captured the prince, whispered one of the twins. Yes, but his daughter set him free. Didn't you see how the prince fell in love with her? He touched her hand and he kissed her. I think he was even asking her to go with him. Belder's voice was husky, and by the time that part was done, she was glad she was only wet. There had been more than a few moans from girls somewhere in the back of the room. Goddess, that was the most romantic thing I've ever seen. Well, she didn't go. She's the princess, and only seems to have her father, Melondi whispered, waving her hand at the man on the screen. She probably thinks she needs to stay and take care of him, even if he's an emperor or something. But I think you're right. She fell in love with him too. It was just so amazing. That dance was amazing, with those twirling things. Jacksmee was groped for words. But her father was there watching in the back? I'd just die if I got a date and found out my father was there watching me. With the room lights off, it was difficult to tell how many new girls stayed to watch the show, but all the girls she could see nodded at Jacksmy's words, despite being riveted to the screen. But it was like they were flying together. I've only seen girls in the gymnastics club do anything like that, said one of the twins in a hushed voice. There were enough girls huddled together in the room now that they were telling each other to be quiet if anyone got too loud. It was a battle with the prince's new army. Melondi leaned over Kellogg's shoulder and whispered back. But the princess met the prince again and they stopped the war. Shh! I get it. The princess wins the hand of the prince after she saves him, and they marry. That's why the two empires are together. Lynn, I think this is just like one of the stories about the first empress uniting the empire. Jacksmy looked over. As that meant it was Kazan on the left and Kamara on the right, she still couldn't tell the pair apart. The actors had come back on the stage and were lining up to the applause. That much seemed normal as far as the end of a performance. The room was packed with hungry faces, looking at her when she brought up the room lights. What the fuck was that, and how do I get a copy? The 6 girls were split over 4 different dorms, and after leaving Jacksmy and the twins at Belinda Hall, Kellogg, Belder and Melondi made for their rooms. It was late, and they'd had to play the video a second time, pass out copies, answer questions. Some of the costumes were so elaborate that the other girls couldn't believe all the performers were actually humans. Kellogg cheerfully waved goodbye to Belder and Melondi as they split off, and she headed back across the quad feeling better about herself than she had since she arrived. It had been a fun night. She'd been happy to get a chance to get into the Who, into Professor Warwick's class, but the homework was still a misery. Goddess, just feeling like she was making some friends was wonderful. Empress Circus Academy was so much harder than Soki Pan Technical had ever been, but the night out really helped. She could get on top of the workload. The recordings of Warwick's class for Capital News were safely stored away, and if she didn't have to spend the rest of her time all alone, then maybe she would get through this without losing her mind. Taking the shortcut through the coast was easy enough. It was dark, as only a moonless night could be, but there was still just enough light from the nearby dorms to make out where she was going. Pain happened. As her body twisted in shock, it seemed absurd how slowly the ground rose up to meet her. Every detail appeared as if cast into stark relief. The grass beneath her looked grey, as the ground rose like a wall. A gnarled tree root was there beneath her, half buried in rich soil that looked black as the night. Kellogg hit the ground, and the blackness took her.